Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dr. Jen Roberts and I'm Deputy Director of the UK Carbon Capture and Storage Research Community, UKCCSRC, and it is with great pleasure that I will be chairing today's joint European CCUS webinar series in partnership with all these organisations on the left of the slide in front of you. And today's webinar is about carbon capture and storage in the UK. So today, by the end of the webinar talks and discussion, you should all come away with a really good overview of where CCS is at in the UK, the trajectory, the future look, and the key policy, regulatory, technological, societal, or other aspects that are shaping the outlook for CCUS development. And I think the webinar is particularly timely. There's been so much activity across the UK, the progress of which can be quite tricky to keep track of. And on the other hand, it can also seem like not very much has happened at all at times. So I think audience today will get an idea of whether things are on track, of course, or maybe ahead of schedule. So to impart this knowledge and to engage in this discussion together with you, we're very glad to be joined by, in speaking order, Nicola O'Dowd, who is Senior Policy Advisor with the UK Government's Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We have John Barraclough, who's Senior Advisor in the Energy Industries Decarbonisation Team in the Environment Agency, and Mark Sommerfeld, who's the UK Director of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. Each speaker will give a 15-minute presentation. Nicola will be speaking about UK government and policy progress. John will tell us about the role of regulators in supporting the deployment of CCUS, and Mark will tell us about the industry progress and developments in this in CCS in the UK. So you're hearing from government, regulator, and industry. We'll then have a couple of minutes, 10 minutes or so, for a specific panel discussion before closing the webinar before our hour is up. Just to say, these presentations are recorded. The recordings and the slides will be available on our website following the webinar. And to our audience, if you have questions for our speakers, for our panelists, then please send them our way through the Q&A function. And I will draw on these questions when directing the discussion. And if you have a question that's very specific or targeted to a particular speaker, please pop that in the question that you submit. So I hope all that is very clear. A very, very warm welcome everyone who's joined us this afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our first speaker, Nicola. Over to you.
So hi, Nicola O'Dowd, thank you for that introduction. I'm part of the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor working on the cluster sequencing programme and specifically in the power CCUS area. And I'm really pleased to have been invited here to talk to you about CCUS in the UK as part of this webinar series. So we know making Britain a clean energy superpower is one of the 5 missions of the current government, and we believe CCUS will safeguard our energy security and it will deliver clean power by 2030. We want to decarbonise industry in a way that drives growth, and we expect CCUS, it's projected to support up to 50,000 jobs and add £5 billion of value annually by 2050. So we think the UK is uniquely placed. It has one of the world's most attractive business and investment environments. So we've, the geography itself, there's a potential of up to 78 billion tonnes of CO2 storage capacity on the UK continental shelf within saline aquifers or within the deep depleted hydrocarbon fields offshore around a coastline. It's one of the largest potential CO2 storage capacities in Europe. We've made great progression so far. So the North Sea Transition Authority have awarded 27 storage licenses, 6 of which have been granted directly, and the remaining 21 to 14 companies, and that was through the first carbon storage licensing round back in 2023. We think we'll need many more to reach our net zero targets, but we're making great progress. As for our expertise, the UK has a worldwide reputation as an international centre of excellence, of engineering excellence. We've got extensive experience and infrastructure from the oil, gas and petrochemical sector. So, we're ranked as one of the top 5 alongside the US, Canada, Norway countries with regards to our CCUS readiness index. This is actively monitoring the progress of the CCUS deployment. So we're kind of pushing ahead and striving ahead, and we're leading on this. And we've committed billions of pounds and provided funding for net zero innovation portfolio, but we're confident in the value that we're generating. We believe in the potential within our transport and storage networks, and we think there is a potential of a multi-billion-pound market for UK CCUS exports. The government views carbon capture as vital for securing growth and a green future. And I think you've probably all seen this image once or twice before. You know, we are committed to driving forward and inspiring new chapter in our nation's approach to the energy narrative. So the funding announced towards the end of last year for the initial projects is a clear commitment to that vision. You know, it was kick-started back in October when we announced up to £21.7 billion of available funding over 25 years, launching kind of the UK carbon capture and storage industry. And then closely followed in December, the East Coast cluster reached financial close, which was something we're very excited to actually sign those contracts, getting the first CCUS projects up and running. And that was with the Northern Enduring Partnership, that's a TNS company in the East Coast cluster, and the Net Zero Teesside Power Plant. So together with the second site benefit from funding, that's the HyNet cluster, which we're still in negotiations with. These clusters, we anticipate will help to remove over 8.5 million tonnes of carbon emissions each year. This hasn't happened overnight. We've had well over a decade working towards this, and we've had significant learnings along the way. So we launched the first competition back in 2007. In fact, we're approaching 2 decades reading that now. The department was progressing the competition at the same time as it was developing UK policy and energy market reforms, and also contributing to the developments in the EU energy policy to facilitate and regulate carbon capture and storage. It was a high-risk, challenging undertaking, and the individual elements of the technology existed, but then yet been linked together and operated at a commercial scale. So ultimately, the competition failed because there was an inability to agree mutually acceptable terms with all members of the consortium. And it was the affordability and value for money that were real concerns for the government. And although the competition didn't result in a contract, it did increase our experience of the associated technical, regulatory, commercial challenges, and gave us much better knowledge of the costs of carbon capture and storage. So this has supported our policy and regulatory work, and it's provided insight into value for money. In 2012, we launched a second competition. Again, this is very ambitious, and ultimately it was unsuccessful and withdrawn in 2015. The model at that stage was a full CCUS chain, so that's from generation all the way through to storage, or at least having access to the full chain. And that was we considered that to be increasing any investor confidence in the carbon capture storage industry. We saw a struggle to allocate the risks between the parties involved. Many people thought that the government needed to carry a bit more risk, that they anticipated that would help reduce the delivery costs. But on the flip side of that, there was exposing taxpayers to the case that any of the risks did materialise. We also recognised in this competition that there needed to be potential to expand the CCS sector without significant costs to the consumers, if we were going to deliver overall value for money. And that's helped develop the cluster model that we've got today. So, after each competition, we've had a better understanding of the commercial and technical viability, the risks, understanding the overall costs. So we've digested and embedded these learnings, and that was brought into the development of the CCUS action plan. That's where we stated our vision to become a global leader in CCUS, and we still stand by this. We have big policy commitments with the Net Zero Initiative, Carbon Budget 6 being set, Boris's 10-point plan, and all of that culminated in us launching the cluster sequencing programme in 2021. So we've embarked on a cluster model. We've got power and industrial carbon capture located in industrial hubs close to the geological storage sites. We think that this will maximise the benefits, bring value for money, and bringing on economies of scale. We've split the cross-chain risks, and we have separate business models for transport and storage and for the different emitter types, which I'll go on to show you now. So these are the business models that we're currently using in the deployment of the track 1, so that's the East Coast cluster and HyNet clusters. We've got the TRI model, that's the transport and storage regulatory investment model, and that's based on the regulated asset base model. And we've got the dispatchable power agreement, DPA, which is what we've signed with NZT, and that incentivises a power plant to play a valuable mid-merit role. We want them to generate behind renewables, but ahead of any unabated plants. We have the industrial carbon capture business model, and that includes the waste industrial carbon capture model. And this is incentivising carbon capture technology for industrial users, such as cement plants, steel, chemicals, who often have no viable alternatives to achieve deep carbonisation. And then finally, there's the hydrogen production business model. And And this provides support for both the development of both CCUS enabled and electrolytic hydrogen production. Our track 1 clusters are the East Coast cluster, commonly known as ECC, and HyNet. So we have HyNet in the northwest, as ENI have the transport and storage and their ambitions to store CO2 in Liverpool Bay. We've got negotiations ongoing with them and with Protos Energy. They're an energy from waste plant. And EET Hydrogen, who have the ambitions to become the first UK's first CCUS-enabled blue hydrogen plant. And we're working hard to finalise deals with HyNet in the first half of this year. ECC in the northeast, who reached financial close last December, that's BP's TNS network. That's the Northern Endurance Partnership, and that's got stores off the northwest coast off of Teesside. And Net Zero Teesside is a 740 megawatt power plant of low carbon flexible generation, and we hope that from 2028 it'll be capturing up to 2 million tonnes of CO2 per year. So the projects attached to HyNet and ECC are not just vital for tackling climate change, but they're a critical step forwards for market creation, and getting these track 1 projects across the line is vital to demonstrate the investability of our models across the various sectors. And it sends a powerful message to sponsors, suppliers and investors to encourage long-term commitment into the UK CCUS sector. And not only will it pave the way for growth, but it will also provide the UK CCUS industry with a competitive edge and potential for boosting trade. Our next steps, we've got track 1 expansion and track 2. We're now in the critical shortlisting and cluster integration phase for the expansion of HyNet. So we can make full use of the storage capacity available in our first 2 clusters. The project negotiation list, which will show the projects that we're going to be negotiating with and taking forwards through, it's expected to be published following the outcome of the spending review later on this year. We also remain committed to the expansion of ECC as long as it's consistent with our affordability, value for money, and we aim to set out a way forward with regards to this as soon as possible. That's also taking into account the readiness of any additional store capacity along the East Coast. We're also engaging with our track 2 clusters. We've got Viking in the northeast and we've got Acorn in Scotland. These 2 clusters were identified as the best placed to be able to deliver on our track 2 objectives. So it's important to note that we are striving forward and we're pushing ahead, but we're currently undertaking some crucial decisions. We're looking at due diligence, consenting processes, subsidy control, affordability, value for money, as I mentioned previously. All this is within the framework of the spending review, the ongoing spending review. Striving ahead though with track 1 expansion and track 2 potentially requires a kind of some other business models to enable its delivery with the PowerBECs. So that's the bioenergy with carbon capture, to incentivise private finance enabled projects. So these will be able to provide negative emissions and firm low carbon electricity. And we've got GGR business model as well. So the greenhouse gas removals business model is being developed to attract a private investment in a portfolio of engineered greenhouse gas removal technologies, and that includes direct air carbon capture. We think we're in a great place to deliver this. We've embedded the learnings over the decades. We've got the support from our UK regulators to continue to advance the development of CCUS. Ofgem regulated for the TNS network, they're enforcing the conditions of the licence. LCCC, low carbon counterparty, is counterparty to our business models and our emitters, and they're working alongside Net Zero Teesside right now. We've got the North Sea Transition Authority, and they're acts as the permitting authority for our offshore storage sites. OPRED and the Environmental Agency, they're providing environmental regulation and ensuring the protection and the improvement to our environment. And then we've got HSE, so the Health and Safety Executive, protecting people in the workplace. And these have responsibilities, including the pipeline safety regulations, which, as you can understand, is pretty critical for the carbon capture and storage. So UK government has clear ambitions. We've said it many times that carbon capture, we think carbon capture is a necessity and it's not an option. We have ambitions to implement carbon capture and storage, and you can see that it fits on the net zero by 2050 pathway, alongside the carbon border adjustment mechanism and the emissions trading scheme. Our goal is to deliver clean power by 2030, and we have legally binding targets of emission reductions by 2035. And we think this is a cost-effective way to implement carbon capture and storage. So back in December 2023, under the previous administration, we published the CCUS vision. So this is the vision to establish a competitive market and looking at how we're going to drive forwards in the future. You know, we have 4 guiding principles. One, we want to decarbonise for future generations. We want to become a global leader. The second, you know, we have the expertise, experience, capacity. Our vision is to exploit the supply chain as well as using the UKCCSRC to sequester emissions from further afield. This has the aim of creating growth, supporting levelling up, creating low carbon investment opportunities throughout the UK. And we want to build a self-sustaining CCUS factor. Ultimately, we want to be confident in the sector, ensure industry has enough confidence so that government can step back, reduce support as we move from first of a kind to nth of a kind projects. So the vision outlines a market transition. It's a 3-phase process made up of the following stages. First is the market creation stage, which is where we're at, and this is focusing on establishing the initial market for CCUS. We want to collaborate closely with industry and our regulatory bodies to discover this phase and to deliver this phase, and deliver the legislative framework for the regulation of the CO2 transport storage network. And through that, we're developing clear and effective network codes for the TNS network. Next phase is the market transition phase. We hope that'll be from 2030. And this aims to transition the market towards self-sustainability. We think will require a significant ramp up in the deployment of CCUS to be able to enable the emergence of a commercial and competitive market, with the ultimate goal of having that self-sustaining market from, you know, the aim and the vision is from 2035 onwards. And this final phase is where the UK CCS market is largely industry-led, requires significantly less government support at present, and we envisage a mature CCUS system incorporating different transport pathways, pipeline, maybe non-pipeline transport, that can capture sufficient CO2 to contribute to net zero, whilst offering storage services to international emitters. So yeah, in conclusion, I think, you know, the UK can lead the world in the provision of the CO2 transport and storage services, and we have one of the largest potential storage capacities in Europe on our UK continental shelf. You know, we've made significant progress, but there is still huge potential. You know, we want to align with the EU ambition to support industry to deploy CCUS at scale, and we see, you know, a strong opportunity to collaborate with the EU on CCUS. Now, our global early mover status, kind of, we've got comparative regulatory regimes such as the storage licensing and safety standards, and kind of with our extensive offshore experience, meaning that we can actually be a valuable partner. And we think with the expansion of CCUS projects globally, this is a pivotal moment for our industry and environment, and for the UK to provide global leadership on CCUS. So with that, yeah, thank you, and I'll hand over.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicola. Very clear steer then from UK government around commitment to CCUS. So let's hand over now, please, to our next speaker, John, who's going to give us the perspective from the regulator's point of view. So John, over to you.
Okay, thanks for inviting me along to talk today. So I'm John Barraclough from the Environment Agency. I work in the Environment and Business Directorate nationally, with a team of technical colleagues on developing our approach to regulating carbon capture in England. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about our role as a regulator. I'm going to talk about some of the carbon capture plants that we've permitted so far, and say a little bit about some of the important aspects that we need to consider as part of our permit determination process. I'll then briefly talk about some of the European engagement activities that we've been undertaking on carbon capture. Next slide, please. So who are the Environment Agency? Well, the UK has an established environmental regulatory regime in place to protect human health and the environment, and we form part of that regulatory regime. The first thing to highlight is that geographically, the Environment Agency only covers England. So you'll see the map on the slide. illustrates our geographical boundaries. It's broken down into a number of area teams across the country. I think it's also important to mention that there are other environmental regulators covering other parts of the UK. So for Wales, we have Natural Resources Wales. For Scotland, we have a Scottish Environment Protection Agency. And for Northern Ireland, we have a Northern Ireland Environment Agency. And we work closely with those other regulatory bodies. And we have a UK Environmental Regulators Carbon Capture Forum where we come together to discuss our approach to regulating carbon capture plants. And we've also collaborated on the development of guidance for industry and applicants of permits. I won't read the list of responsibilities that the Environment Agency has, but you'll see from a slide that we have a broad regulatory remit. We also have a duty to support sustainable development in its wider sense. Our regulation of industrial carbon capture falls under the regulating major industry and waste theme, although there is obviously some relevance to water quality and resources. Next slide, please. So what is our role in regulating carbon capture? So we issue environmental permits for the carbon capture process itself at an installation. So it could be a power station, could be a waste incineration plant, a refinery. And that's under the environmental permitting regulations, or EPR, as it's more commonly known. And the regulations in EPR that cover carbon capture were transposed from the EU Industrial Emissions Directive. We also regulate the installation under the UK Emissions Trading Scheme. On the transport side, you'll likely be aware that CO2 transport in the UK is expected to be by pipeline, and although non-pipeline routes such as road and rail are also being considered, we don't regulate pipelines under the environmental permitting regulations, but we do regulate CO2 transfers under the UK Emissions Trading Scheme. We also have a role as a consultee in the land planning process for CO2 transport pipelines. The UK's approach for geological storage of CO2 is offshore in either saline aquifers or depleted hydrocarbon fields. And we heard earlier from Nicola, there's a potential storage capacity of 78 billion tonnes, which is a lot. Again, the Environment Agency don't directly have a regulatory remit for CO2 storage offshores. That, as a North Sea Transition Authority, issue permits for this activity. However, if there was temporary CO2 storage onshore as part of a CO2 capture plant process, then it's highly likely that that would be permitted by us as part of the permitted carbon capture plant installation. Next slide, please. Okay, so you'll no doubt be aware that CO2 is typically captured from large emitters such as power stations, cement plants, waste incineration plants. On this slide, I just wanted to show you some of the sites that we've permitted so far. So we've issued 5 permits in England for carbon capture plants, and this is covering gas power plants, waste incineration plant, and a hydrogen production plant. You may have recognized again some of these names from the slide that Nicola showed earlier, which are track 1 projects. Just to say, these permits are available to view online if you wanted to have a look at some of the conditions that we put in our permits. And no doubt we'll share the slides afterwards, but I put a hyperlink in, particularly to the Net Zero Teesside permit and the Protos Energy Recovery Facility permit, so you'll be able to have a look at those after the webinar. We've also got several other permit applications still in determination, and these include biomass energy with carbon capture storage, power CCS, hydrogen production, waste to energy, and a refinery. And in total, these carbon capture plants have the potential to annually capture over 21 million tonnes of CO2 between them, which will go some way towards meeting the government's ambition to have the capacity to capture up to 30 million tonnes by 2030. In addition to this, we've also had interest from a number of other developers that are looking at deploying carbon capture, some of which we've had formal permit pre-application meetings with. Just to say that all of these applications are proposing to use post-combustion carbon capture processes using amine solvents. We are looking at what the potential environmental impacts might be from other types of carbon capture process that may emerge, but we've not received any applications for those types of developments yet. Next slide, please. So this slide illustrates some of the important elements of permitting a carbon capture plant. And broadly, we expect operators to provide a description of the carbon capture plant and associated CO2 compression, and then their proposed operating techniques. An operator must show in their application how their techniques align with our guidance that we've published on the national government website, gov.uk, which is guidance for emerging techniques for post-combustion carbon capture. Just a bit of background to the development of that guidance. So there were no existing European-backed conclusions for carbon capture. So UK regulators developed our guidance on emerging techniques following the Industrial Emissions Directive. Currently, our guidance on emerging techniques only relates to carbon capture using amine solvents for obvious reasons, because those are the applications we've had so far. Just to say where applicants are coming forward and proposing different types of technology, then they should broadly follow that guidance, the headings in that guidance when coming forward with their application. As things evolve and new types of applications come forward, we will develop that guidance further. And I've got a link to the guidance that we've developed in a separate slide. So just looking at some of the things that we're particularly interested in as part of the permit application process. So choice of solvent is really important because it affects the potential design of and performance of the plant. CO2 capture efficiency. So we're looking for a design of the plant so it can achieve 95% CO2 capture. We also want to know whether that capture rate can be achieved during periods of abnormal operations, such as during startup and shutdown. And if it can't, then we need the applicants to provide justification. We are looking for applicants to maximize CO2 capture where they can during those periods. Incoming gas treatment and cooling is extremely important, as it can influence solvent degradation and ultimately the emissions from the plant. So that's of interest as part of the process. We're also interested in the methods of solvent management and how solvent degradation will be addressed, and solvent reclaiming to remove any degradation products from the process. And then on the flue gas abatement from absorber towers, we're looking at what abatement is going to be in place, whether it be water wash or acid washers to remove ammonia or amines or some of the degradation products from that process. Just on the energy side of things, so you'll be aware that there's a potential for a significant energy penalty where a carbon capture is deployed at a site. So we do need operators to focus on energy efficiency as to how the carbon capture plant is integrated with the main installation it's treating the CO2 from. That's a really important element. Monitoring is important as well, so not just emissions monitoring, although that will be part of it, but process monitoring as well. So we're interested in seeing how the approach to monitoring solvent degradation and also CO2 capture performance. Just a little bit about risk assessments. So in broad terms, noise is going to be extremely important. So noise from a carbon capture plant, cooling system or CO2 compression, emissions to air. So we likely require detailed modeling of emissions, considering both direct and indirect emissions of things like nitrosamines and nitramines formed from the amine solvent reactions. Habitats will also be important, habitats assessment. So in some locations, the environment is constrained by critical levels of substances. So we need to be mindful of this. Operators need to be mindful of this when looking at developing their plants and their applications. And then also on emissions to water, that's likely to be important as well, where there are potential waste streams from some of the pollution abatement technologies that are being used. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the guidance we've developed. So this slide provides a link to that guidance. Just to say a bit of a shout out for UK Carbon Capture Storage Research Centre. So they led the work on gathering the evidence for our post-combustion carbon capture guidance using amine solvents, and there's a link to that evidence review on this slide, along with the guidance at the top. We've also produced a blue hydrogen production with carbon capture guidance, which is on gov.uk, and again you can see the evidence review that was used as part of that process. Next slide, please. So just very quickly on European engagement. So although the UK is no longer a member of the European Union, we are still a European country, and the Environment Agency has retained our membership of the Impel network of European regulators. I've put a hyperlink on this slide if you wanted to have a look at their role in a little bit more detail. There is currently an Impel project that is focused on the waste incineration back conclusions, which has an element of carbon capture. But there is no broader project that covers carbon capture at the moment, and that's something that we've been discussing with other European regulators. UK environmental regulators also have engagement with other European regulators through the European Environmental Protection Agencies network, which has a special interest group on CCS. And then lastly, we also have other engagement with European regulators through less formal routes. And we've had discussions with a number of countries, including Norway, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, Switzerland, and Iceland, to share our experiences of permitting carbon capture plants. And all of this engagement is useful for us to share the lessons that we've learnt over the last few months. Last slide, please. Okay, so in summary, the Environment Agency is supportive of CCS as a means towards achieving sustainable development and net zero. We've been working with stakeholders to develop our approach to regulating carbon capture plants, and this work will evolve as industry develops. Ultimately, best available technique standards, so which are commonly referred to as BAT standards or BAT conclusions, will be developed for the whole of the UK once we have operational evidence on plant performance. But until then, our guidance on emerging techniques identifies the best practices to address important environmental issues. And then lastly, just to say, we welcome the opportunity to contribute towards the UK government's growth mission. We know there are things that we can do to improve our carbon capture guidance and make our permitting services more efficient. And we'll be working on those aspects over the coming year. So that brings me to the end of my talk. I hope you found it useful, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as part of the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So that's the perspective from the regulator, and now we move on to the perspective from industry. So Mark Sommerfeld, and get your surname right this time, sorry, over to you.
I should start off by saying a lot of what I am covering in this slide pack you'll recognise as very similar pieces that that Nicola covered. But what I'm hoping to try and do is provide an industry perspective, an outlook on how those developments are being viewed, and what we need to see coming down the line. And I've seen a number of questions coming up in the chat about what are the timetables for decisions, and how is industry dealing with those timetables. So we'll explore some of that as well. First of all, though, just to introduce myself and to introduce the CCSA. So I'm Mark Sommerfeld. I'm UK Director for the CCSA. So I look after our UK advocacy activities here with the team. We do also have an office in Brussels looking at the EU market and engaging with the European Commission on CCS matters as well. Obviously, as any trade association, we therefore focus on advocating for CCS policy, raising awareness about the technology, driving progress on commercial scale projects. And we also take a technology neutral approach. So we represent all forms of carbon capture and the associated infrastructure that sits around it as well. That's just a view of all of our members. We're now at about 130 members, probably too many now to fit on this slide. And as you can tell, it's becoming slightly cramped, but we do have members right across the supply chain, as well as service providers into the industry. So we are increasingly looking across how this sector is evolving and developing, and we get new companies involved. So Nicola mentioned that this is now the third time that we've been attempting to support the CCS sector, and an awful lot of lessons have been learned over that period. But maybe just to zero in on the most recent attempt, which is now underway, and which is by and far the most successful to date, as it were, and we're really seeing positive outcomes coming from it. But really, we can date this back to 2017 and commitments by the then government to seeing CCUS at scale in the 2030s, and establishment of the ministry-led CCUS Council and CCUS Challenge Task Force at the time. Those messages were carried through consecutive governments, and when I say consecutive governments, of course, we know that in the UK there's been a number of governments in that time period, but all of them have been committed within their various net zero strategies and 10-point plans to the delivery of CCUS and advancing this program for CCUS delivery, which the industry have been fully and heavily engaged with as well. And then that has also led, as Nicola mentioned, to the development of the carbon capture, usage and storage vision document, the December 2023 document that Nicola went through, which really sets out how the government want to see the CCUS sector evolving, and the industry are very much aligned with that. So importantly, seeing a sector that recognise that it is currently nascent, needing support to be evolved, but really wanting to see those initial projects deployed as quickly as possible, so that learning rates can be picked up, cost reductions can be realised, and we create a self-sustaining industry into the future. In more recent times, I think it's appropriate to also look at what has this relatively new government, now 8 or 9 months on since the election, but how is the industry viewing the government's approach to CCUS? And by and large, it's been reasonably positive. It has been, there's been positive statements from the government around support for CCUS. It has remained and continues to remain a critical part of their net zero mission, and has been reflected well within reasonably regular statements from government coming out. We've already mentioned on this call the announcements at the back end of last year, so including the 21.7 billion funding for CCUS projects on the 4th of October around the Track 1 projects, and then the NZT Power and the Northern Endurance Partnership reaching financial close on the 10th of December. Those two developments in particular really signal, industry saw as really signalling a strong message of support from government. They understood the need to move this sector forward, and recognised the need to invest in it and get those decisions made. So at the end of last year, really positive signals in terms of actually delivering real projects. And to reiterate, we now have real projects being built out and developed, having reached financial close, which is an important step forward that we've not seen before. So taking confidence from that. I was going to cover the vision, but I feel that Nicola's already done that in a very strong way. But just to reiterate there that the industry is committed to also seeing this vision, and a lot of the work that we're now doing within the CCSA and working with our members is thinking about how do we now move from a position of establishing the market. How do we ensure that that continues, so we get those initial decisions on Track 1, Track 2, Track 1 expansion, and we get those projects deployed as quickly as possible. But then from there, how do we start to realise this vision as well and move on to a more self-sustaining market? We also take confidence, and I put a box just there in the right, that the 7th Carbon Budget, which was published recently by the Climate Change Committee, their advice on how to reach the 7th Carbon Budget, was very, very clear on the need for CCS within that. So saying that they do not see they cannot see a route to net zero that does not include CCS. And critically, that's not just in relation to power production, but that's in relation to decarbonising industries, that's in relation to meeting the net zero power mission by 2030, and realising important low carbon products and supply chains for UK growth. So things like low carbon cement, low carbon fuels, low carbon chemicals. So really, there is a strong message here, and the industry is happy to see that there is a strong intention to see a strong vision and need for CCS to be delivered. Back in 2023, the CCSA published our CCUS delivery plan. This was looking across all of the projects and pipeline for delivery in the UK and identifying, the volumes of carbon capture that could be delivered, how they compare to government targets, and what does that pipeline really look like. And through that, back in 23, we identified 94 megatons of CO2 per year, potential 94 megatons CO2 per year being captured by 2035. So demonstrating a really strong and vibrant pipeline of projects. And importantly, that's not just in the 4 clusters that are currently being negotiated with government, but a total of 12 clusters across the whole UK, across a wide range of industrial heartlands and industrial areas, demonstrating that there is there's a significant desire for growth well beyond just the initial clusters that absolutely need to be delivered, but there are other clusters beyond that working towards similar timeframes and delivery timeframes that also want to see CCS deployed, capturing that CO2 on critical industries, on energy production, and storing it across a wide area of a wide number of basins across the North Sea as well. Also part of that, and mentioned on the graph on the right there, demonstrating how that potential breaks down by different industries, but also including the role there for greenhouse gas removals. So the use of CCS on biogenic carbon sites, that could be energy from waste, that can be biomass, that could be anaerobic digestion, anything using a biogenic feedstock. But really seeing that as a further growth opportunity for the UK, in particular, given the ability to tap into negative emission markets, be that within the UK ETS or within the voluntary carbon markets, and providing that additional revenue stream for paying for carbon removals and greenhouse gas removals. And that being seen as another critical area for the CCS sector to be evolving and developing, and really providing further value for money for the delivery of this sector. So where are we today? Again, Nicola kind of went through where the different tracks are, but maybe just from just to reiterate from an industry perspective. As said, fantastic to see within track 1 the first few projects reach financial close, and that 21.7 billion over 25 years for 5 projects being delivered. But obviously on the rest of HyNet on the west coast there, we're still awaiting delivery of financial close decisions on those, and we're aware government and industry are working very closely in order to get that over the line. So we are awaiting announcements around HyNet. On track 2, we've also got these are large-scale projects that have invested very significant amounts of money in the run-up to seeing the delivery of track 2. They've been now waiting for almost 2, maybe 3 years in some cases for announcements around how that is being taken forward. So announcements within the spending review coming up are going to be absolutely critical to see the delivery of that as well. Similarly for track 1 expansion, and seeing the development of the East Coast cluster within that as well. So the spending review being seen as a really critical time for ensuring that these initial projects are deployed and delivered, and having firm decisions made on them. Other UK clusters and projects, as already mentioned, there's a wide number of potential clusters across the UK that are under development, but also needing transparent and predictable allocation frameworks in order to see them delivered, and work also evolving on non-pipeline transport methods and NPT in order to see that delivered as well. We're pleased to see that the government have really got their NPT work streams underway from the end of last year, but that certainly needs to be sped up and in order that those projects can also be entering into the future allocation rounds. I'm just going to shuffle on because I feel like we've covered some of this as well. Nicola also talked about the business models that are under development. You know, these are long-term discussions that have now been happening with industry on a number of them, and a number of them are basically there in terms of their final design, which is really positive to see from industry. But really, the message is continuing to come from industry that things like the GGR business model, the Power-BEX business model, those ones that are still in the early phases, really needing to be stepped up and seeing progress made on them in a quick pace, so that those projects know what they are committing to and can reach the kind of financial close that we expect to be able to see once track 2 and track 1 expansion decisions are made. So lots of industrial discussions still going on there, and wanting to see the confidence provided by the design of those models and ensuring that they are suitably investable. There are a number of wider developments within the market that are also impacting it across the wider policy sphere. So we've had the Clean Power 2030 action plan. We've got the industrial strategy also coming up, which we see CCS is absolutely critical to. We've got spatial modelling happening with both the National Energy System Operator, NESO, and a future infrastructure strategy as well. We've also got public finance now entering into this space through the National Wealth Fund and Great British Energy, all of which are expected to include CCUS and see the sector driving forward. So overall, what are we hopeful to see within the spending review? The CCSA did a modelling out of their delivery plan and understanding the number of projects that could be reaching FID within this period, and identifying a potential need for a strong financing envelope of 4.2 billion from 2028 to 2045. But for that money, we reckon there are very significant economic growth opportunities being realised. So 26 billion in terms of private investment in UK industrial heartlands, 25 megatons per annum of additional CCUS capacity by 2030, over 50,000 jobs, and 94 billion pounds of cumulative GVA being delivered. Really delivering that will require a clear and predictable timetable for allocation rounds and also enabling MPT in there as well. There are also wider market enablers that industry are working towards and wanting to see happen. So accelerating delivery of the comprehensive carbon market, so it's the UK ETS and the EU ETS, addressing barriers to cross-border carbon markets with Europe. So really making use of the huge potential we have in the North Sea to be storing cross-border CO2. And establishment of low carbon product markets. So that could be things like low carbon product standards or public procurement obligations. And we can also look at protecting UK industries from carbon leakages by making sure the CBAM is effective and well designed. Finally, then, just to mention a couple of other papers and projects that the CCSA are looking at, and some which we have recently published. So in particular, working with industry to identify the levers for driving cost reductions in the CCUS space. So things like collaborative contracting, innovation, and innovation within technologies and future allocation designs in order to deliver CapEx, OpEx, and the cost of finance and bringing those costs down and being able to identify how that can be done. We've also done a lot of work at looking at accelerating a European-wide CO2 storage market, so that cross-border piece, and bringing captured carbon from Europe into UK stores. And we're also speaking with our members and actively discussing with government around future allocation frameworks and looking to update our delivery plan from 2023 this year as well. So lots of research and putting out positive messages around how the industry can evolve. And with that, I will bring it to a close. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. And I think that actually some of your reflections in that presentation would have addressed some of the questions that have been coming in through the Q&A function, because I think in many cases the response is either we're working on it or we need to work on it. So we've got 4 minutes, of which about 3 minutes is going to be for questions. What I am going to do is ask each of you to reflect, maybe just take a minute or less, to think about, given the lead-in time for major infrastructure and particularly kind of complex or first of a kind, maybe not first of a kind technologies, and the kind of the fresh landscape that we're working in, despite all this progress you've talked about, despite all this really impressive effort as well, what do you feel is key for the next 5 years for meeting the 2030 or 2035 targets and ambitions for CCUS in the UK? And I think I might ask each of you in turn in reverse speaking order. So Mark first, then John, then Nicola.
So I think the first thing that has to be said in regards to that is, obviously a strong statement out of the comprehensive spending review around how track 1, track 2, track 1 expansion and other projects that are delivering along similar timelines, how they can be delivered, and a real clear delivery of that and committed funding as part of that. That will set the sector up for delivering those 5-year targets. They absolutely have to be delivered if those targets are going to be met. The other point I'd also make is within the government's response to the Committee on Climate Change's CB7, we want to see what the new ambition there is for CCS and making sure that that's clearly identified and deliverable within their delivery plans for that.
Cool. Thank you, Mark. John, over to you.
Just mute myself again. Yeah, obviously I'm going to focus on the permitting side of things, and I think there's been questions about how we can expedite the permitting process for these developments. I think there are a few things that need to happen. I think developers need to allow more time for the permitting process. They need to engage with us very early on in that process as well, through formal enhanced permit pre-application meetings, so that we can we can advise them about the level of detail that we expect to see in a permit application. And I think the last point is, I think if we can improve the quality of the applications, the level of detail that's in the applications, then that can avoid some of the delays that we're seeing at the moment, where we have to go back to operators to ask for that additional information. So yeah, I think those are the three main points. As an organisation, we have been prioritising these applications and trying to move them forward as quickly as possible. And we have learned quite a lot in the last 2 years as well. So I think things will get quicker as we move forward.
Thank you. Nicola, your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I guess going third means I'm going to echo Mark and John somewhat. Getting a positive result from the spending review is really critical to keep moving forwards, and we are pushing as hard as we can and kind of working with our counterparties to kind of express just how important this is. Equally, I think good collaboration with our industrial partners and our technical teams to ensure that we are kind of communicating well, working together, being very collaborative between the emitters and the TNSCos to really push forwards. A personal opinion, I think we really need to strive with the storage sites and make sure we've got really, really good concrete evaluations of the stores and making sure that we have that available. I think we have plenty of emitters that, given the right business model and the right incentives, we can actually capture the carbon. It's just making sure that we can store it safely and effectively.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you to all three of you. And thank you to the audience very much for staying around and for so many brilliant, thoughtful questions as well. I think all I need to do now is just to flag up that we will be gathering again in about a month's time, 2nd of May, to learn about CCUS in Denmark. So I will leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in about a month's time hearing about our neighbours in Denmark.